Hi, Campbell employee family. I wanted to provide you with the information that I'm going to share tonight at our community meeting so that you could be informed of what is being shared with our community. So what's going to happen in the meeting tonight is I'm going to have an overview of the meeting structure. I actually want to take us through how we've gotten from where we started to where we are, because I think it's important that everybody have the same context for interpretation. I'll talk a little bit about our plans for phase 2. Then we're going to have breakout rooms. If you're just watching this recording, you won't have the opportunity for breakout rooms, but you as staff have the opportunity to provide your input at your respective school sites. So essentially what the meeting is going to do is provide an overview of what's happened since the spring of 2020. We're going to review our phase 2 model, gather input, and then I'm also going to share with our community how I'm going to follow up on the input that they provide. And what the meeting will not focus on is we won't spend time on our safety protocols. Those are available on our website and have been distributed. And we also won't spend time on specific questions relating to individual students or specific school sites. So the journey that we've been on so far, we started in March of 2020, and now here we are in February 2021. So our process and our landscape, when we first went into our school closures, we had work groups to examine all of the public health department requirements and recommendations. We assessed all of our operations. We made sure that we secured necessary supplies and PPE to be compliant with all of the recommendations and the guidelines. And so that happened from March until June, where we really made sure that we had everything. One example is making sure that we had the MERV 13 filters and that we changed the inflow of air so that we could have the maximum ventilation that was recommended. We also secured a lot of PPE, and we've delivered a lot of that to the school sites, and then we also have some in storage at our courtyard. The other thing was the State Association of California School Administrators convened a reopening advisory group, and I was one of 12 superintendents invited to be part of that group. And we met several times to provide input to the governor and to legislators on our recommendations for planning for school reopening for in-person instruction, because before that they were making plans but not engaging school leadership on what that might actually translate to at the school site. In that moment in time, one of the specifics that we requested was if the state and the counties determined when schools should close for in-person instruction, we were requesting that there be a similar gauge to determine when schools would be ready to reopen for in-person instruction. Unfortunately, that was something that wasn't really responded to, and to this date has not yet been responded to. So they left the determinations up to the local districts to work with their labor groups and to their communities to come up with their respective plans. Also, we convened a district reopening committee, and I have the dates that we have met listed. And what we did was we reviewed all of the work group safety guidelines. We looked at survey data. We brainstormed potential schedules, and then representatives from the committee went out to the groups they represent. They got input, they came back, and we iterated on this, and then we would provide recommendations at various board meetings on our proposed reopening plan. And so our first reopening plan was presented to the governing board on July 24th. And then also we were working with our labor groups because it did affect some of the traditional workload or workflow. And so we acknowledged that, and we reached agreement with our classified association the end of July of this year. And then we also, I sought a waiver. And the reason I did that was because in our proposed plan, even in phase 1, which was all district learning, we acknowledged that we wanted to have the possibility of in-person instruction for targeted subgroups. And so I went through the waiver process so we could bring in students for IEP assessments, students with special needs, or other situations where students were really struggling when they were at home trying to learn. So I went through the process. We were approved by the local and state public health departments. And then shortly after I obtained the waiver, then our county public health department actually released guidance to allow for small group cohorts. But prior to that, that didn't exist. Also, what was happening was I was beginning to receive a lot of contradictory information. So some people were telling me that they absolutely were not ready to come back, and some people were saying they were ready to come back, and what were we waiting on? And so one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to survey our community, because we were in the red tier at that point in time. And so it looked like we would be ready to go back for in-person instruction. However, when I conducted the surveys, what I found was a little over half of our families indicated that they were ready or somewhat ready, but less than a third of all of our staff indicated that they were ready. And then less than a quarter of our classroom teachers indicated that they were ready. And so what that indicated to me was the structure that we needed to be able to go to in-person instruction was not ready. And so what I shared with the community is we are technically ready with all of the safety protocols and things of that nature. However, the system is not yet ready to return for in-person instruction. Unfortunately, shortly after that was when it was determined that not only would our county not move from orange back to red, we moved all the way from orange to purple. And then we know that as the Thanksgiving holiday and then with winter holidays coming, that the COVID-19 numbers skyrocketed. Additionally, this entire time we had been working with our Teachers Association from the spring until we reached an agreement with our Teachers Association on December of 2020. And so what that allowed for now is we have agreement with our labor groups that we can move forward with our reopening plan, which is predicated on our county being in the red tier. So we were simply just preparing and readying ourselves for when our county got to the place of the red tier. And so while we were on winter break, the governor presented a proposed incentive plan, and that was at the end of December. It's a little frustrating as a school leader that this happened while all schools were closed for winter session. Although it was also noted that his plan would require legislative approval, and to this point, that hasn't happened. Another thing happened with the California Department of Public Health in mid-January. They released new guidelines indicating that when the case counts were at 25 per 100,000 in a particular area, that would mean that the schools could reopen for TK through 6th grade instruction. This was a brand new metric that had never been mentioned or introduced before. And we already had our agreement on our reopening in the red tier. And then because there was a lot of press and some concern about the proposed incentive plan, which it would have actually provided funding and money to districts who had lower case counts, and then not allowing that same opportunity for districts and counties like ours or in LA County where the COVID-19 numbers were much higher. And so I was one of a few school leaders invited to present to the Finance and Education Senate hearing the third week of July to provide what some of the challenges would be to implement in the school setting for the governor's proposal. One of the points that I raised was my concern about using Prop 98 dollars that were for all schools to redirect those to targeted schools, especially when every school district had been required to go through their own process of coming to agreement on when they would be ready to reopen. and changing all of the standards after the fact seemed a little hard to live into. At this point in time, the legislators are still working on the revised criteria. One of the things that we have worked to do is provide information and seek information from our community throughout this entire process. And I've listed the ways in which we've engaged with our various community members. And also, I just want to remind us that back in August, we determined that we were going to have to establish a school situation. And at that point in time, we might have done it differently if we would have realized that we would be in the end of February and still not be in the red tier in our county, allowing us for in-person instruction. But at the time in which we made our plans, we determined that we could appropriately staff and provide instructional program for our students if we knew before school started which families wanted a full year distance learning program and which families wanted a phased in approach that we had presented to the board in July. And so just 3 weeks before school started, we re-enrolled and we stood up an entirely new all year distance learning school that we staffed with teachers, support staff, and administrators. And actually almost 1/7 of our population elected this option. And then we assigned all of our other students to the phased in distance learning process. So our phase 2 in our scheduling, essentially what we planned for in July is what we're still doing. We'll go into phase 2 when it's safe to do so. And we, working with our community and labor groups, determined that that would be when we reach the red tier. And we also said that we would transition to hybrid based on the local conditions and the public health department orders. We also indicated that we would give 2 weeks advance notice to our families before moving to phase 2 of in-person instruction. Because we know that we have to work within our staffing allocations when our in-person phase begins, but we also recognize, and this is a change from our July plan, that we need to provide something for those students and their families who are not yet ready to return for in-person instruction. And so that's an adjustment that we've made, and our schools will be sending out information on Thursday, the 25th, to all of our families, 1, to remind them what their hybrid schedule is, and 2, to allow them to provide information if they are not yet ready to return for in-person instruction. Also, what has continued to be part of our plan is the need for staggered times and varied entrances to support the need for social distancing. And so again, if schools have more entrance points, then they don't have to have as many staggered times. If schools have fewer, then they may have to have more staggered times. And that's why each school sent out their specific schedules in December. So where are we now? We know that the governor lifted the stay-at-home order at the end of January, even though our county is still in the purple tier. We also know that he presented a plan for encouraging schools to reopen. However, that still has not been adopted by the legislators. We know that the California Public Health Department provided new framework, and they had additional guidance and guidelines and compliance requirements, which most of those are internal practices, and we have met all of those. And also, we continue to say that we will move to phase 2 on the first Monday after 14 days of our county being in the red tier. We also have been able to stand up employee testing, tracking, and tracing. And we also require any student who tests symptomatic or is a close contact who would be attending in-person school to be tested prior to being able to return for in-person instruction. We are working on developing a district dashboard, which will show positive case counts and any programs or classrooms that have to quarantine, although we will do that in a way that maintains confidentiality of the individuals. Also, We're excited that our education staff can begin being vaccinated in our county as early as Saturday. So we've been doing testing, tracking, and tracing for quite some time. And what I wanted to draw your attention to here is since July of 20 until February 1st of 21, of all of the folks that we've had on campus, we've had 0 outbreaks. And so I show the numbers of the percentage of employees that have tested positive for COVID-19, our preschoolers, our students in our learning lab. And I think it's very important to note that with our mitigation strategies, none of those adults or students coming into our system from an exposure outside of the system have spread it inside our system. And so we're very proud of those numbers, and we will continue with the diligence in the mitigation strategies. So again, every single site's provided information to their families in December, and those were showing the specific site-based details of how the district's overall plan would be implemented based on the specifics of each site. The phase 2 hybrid schedule. So I think it's important for us to know that once we have entered the red tier, the first Monday after 14 days of being in the red tier, we will begin TK through 2nd grade coming back for their hybrid schedule at our elementary sites, and then 6th grade will start back in our middle school. And then a week later, 3 through 5 will come back at our elementary schools, and 7 and 8 will return at our middle schools. I've noted down here our 2 TK through 8th grade schools and their specific schedules as well. And so what that schedule will be is there will be in-person learning up to 4 hours, 2 days for each cohort. And we've broken the cohorts as much as we could into similar numbers. If it was a combo class, it may have been done differently. And we've worked to keep siblings in the same cohort. Again, we have staggered start and end times to support the social distancing. And if there's a situation where there are siblings with different arrival times, we have made arrangements at the sites for those students to all come at the same time and then go to their respective classes at their appointed time. There will be assigned seating within the classrooms, and then also staggered recess to avoid mixing of cohorts. The Wednesday schedule, while students will not necessarily be coming in, there is a provision for some target instruction to happen on Wednesdays, and how we'll support small group instruction. And the majority of students in phase 2 will have asynchronous learning on Wednesdays. And then also this will allow for teacher collaboration, staff development, staff meetings, and prep time for our teachers. So a couple of things that our most recent reopening committee came up with for recommendations is the concern about simultaneous instruction, now often known as roomers and zoomers, was not one that was favored. And that is where the teacher would be providing the same instruction to students who are physically in front of them as students who are learning from home on their devices. The concern was there could be additional technology hangups. Also, it presents an additional distraction for the classroom teacher in that they're trying to monitor what's happening with the students who are in person in front of them, while also keeping track of the students who are zooming into the lesson and any problems that they might have. And there was a desire to have the in-person experience for our learners be different from that they would be getting if they were learning at home remotely. We did acknowledge, or it was acknowledged from our committee members, that Middle schools seem to be a little bit more comfortable with the hybrid approach, and they've talked through that a little bit more. One of the things that we will be spending more time on is specific ways to use specialized staff during both the asynchronous time and the synchronous activities so that we can provide more support for our students. Another recommendation was how we might be able to use parent volunteers or other school volunteers who would have come into the classroom. How might they support by being chat monitors or breakout session support and things of that nature. We also want to determine how to best use special education reading intervention staff into the specific schedules, and a lot of that work will be done at the site level based on the specific needs of the students who receive intervention or have an IEP. And one of the recommendations that the committee also made was this learning from what we know to inform the next phase. And so we want to iterate for our phase 3 plans based on the information that we learned during phase 2. And one of the things that we have a challenge that we need to rectify when we move from 2 to 3 will be how would we provide check-in support for our asynchronous learning students when the in-person time is extended for the students in front of the classroom teacher. And we'll also need to make sure that we have the provisions and the distancing and all of those requirements for lunch as well. And so we're going to have the breakout sessions now, and each one of those sessions will be facilitated by a district staff member. And we're asking folks to allow time for everyone to share. And we're asking that while we understand there are divergent views on these topics, that everyone be respectful in the way in which they listen to and share their own information. And then our staff is going to capture those ideas that are shared verbally through a live Google Doc, as well as saving all the comments that are placed in our chat section. And then so everyone will be randomly placed into a Zoom breakout session, and we will be asking these 3 questions. What are the opportunities as we transition to phase 2? What are the barriers to consider as we transition to phase 2? And then what other considerations do our attendees want to make sure the district is making? We're going to allow 25 minutes for the breakout sessions and for each of those 3 questions. So then after the breakout session happens, I'll be sharing with the community that based on the continued social distancing requirements, our original plan for phase 3 won't work, because that was our plan, was to bring both of the cohorts together for in-person instruction. And we know the 6 feet social distancing would not allow for us to do that. And so another recommendation from our committee was, like I said before, apply what we've learned from phase 2 when we plan for phase 3. We do know that the goal of phase 3 is to extend the in-person learning time. And so we need to look at what that would look like. Also, there were comments that the weather will improve, and so we may have more opportunities for outdoor learning, outdoor spaces. And so we want to be making sure that we look at that as a potential option. And then the next steps for the families are the information that will be sent out from the sites to remind them of the cohort the students are assigned to, as well as the school schedule. We're also making the provision for parents to indicate that they're not ready to return. As I mentioned, that wasn't part of our original plan, but we know that that's an important aspect that we need to include. We'll be taking all of the comments and the feedback and reporting a response back out to our community the first week of March. Part of that will include extrapolating from all of the information that we gather from families who indicate they're not yet ready, depending on the numbers at respective school sites. We'll be working with the school site leadership, who will be working with grade level teams and with the instructional leadership, and staff to determine how to meet the SB 98 requirement for students who are not ready for the hybrid, while also being able to do all of the other tasks that they'll need to do during this hybrid process. So we are eagerly awaiting the time when we are in the red tier and we can begin our move to in-person instruction in phase 2. And then I'm just going to close with thanking everybody for their attendance and for coming to here. So you have all of the information that will be provided to the community, and thanks for listening and being part of our family.